Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy, and we are continuing our discussion on the Genealogical Proof Standard, dealing with element 4. And that element 4, from all perspectives, first coming from Mastering Genealogical Proof by Thomas Jones on page 3, is resolution of any conflicts between evidence and the proposed answer to a research question. And then looking at first chapter of Genealogical Standards, the words are resolution of conflicts among evidence items pertaining to the proposed answer. On one side it's question, on the other side it's answer. Now if we go a little bit farther and dig a little deeper in what is said about these two in Genealogical Proof Standard, it says resolution of conflicting evidence ensures that all relevant evidence, not just part of it, supports the conclusion. And going the one step further into genealogical standards, we see that it says resolution of a conflicting evidence substantiates the conclusion's credibility. If conflicting evidence is not resolved, a credible conclusion is not possible. So those are the pieces. In order to have conflicting evidence, you have to have a question, and you also have to have an answer. And there should not be conflict in between. Now, conflict is going to exist no matter what. For example, just recently, this past week, I finally located my grandfather's birth record in Effingham County, Illinois. I wasn't really spending any time looking for it, and Family Search gave it to me as a clue, and I looked at it and went, oh good God. It says that my grandfather, who I knew as Worley Thomas Scott, his birth name was Thomas Worley Scott. So I have his birth record that says Thomas Worley Scott, and I have his death record that says Worley Thomas Scott. I have no indication anywhere in his entire life whether he was ever known as Thomas Worley Scott. His marriage record says Worley Thomas Scott. Here we have a conflict. And recognize that you're not going to resolve that conflict. From the perspective of, he doesn't have two birth records. He only has one. He only has one marriage record. He only has one death record. 3 records together, 2 out of 3 say his name is Worley Thomas Scott. When I talked to him as a child, he was my grandfather, Worley Thomas Scott. So in my mind, his name is Worley Thomas Scott. That is what he was known by. So how do you caveat that? Well, the Genealogical Proof Standard requires that you include the fact that you found a birth record for Thomas Worley Scott, and then you explain that he was known as Worley Thomas Scott in both marriage, death, and throughout life, in census, everywhere else. In fact, the earliest census has him as W.T. Scott. So the birth record is not congruent. It conflicts, but you can make a case that it's wrong. And that's what you have to do, is make the case that it's wrong. You don't ignore it, you include it, because somebody will show up someday after you've said his name is Worley Thomas Scott, and they'll tell you his name is Thomas Worley Scott because there it is in his birth record, and you did not include the birth record in your information when you created your report. My whole family is full of this kind of thing. My mother's birth certificate doesn't have an E on the end of Jacqueline. She didn't know it. I don't even think when she got her birth certificate, she noticed that the E was, when she went for Social Security, that she even noticed that the E was missing from her birth certificate. I don't think anybody else did either. When my grandmother hit 63, she asked me to help her get her Social Security started. So I said, well, you got your birth certificate? We have to establish your date of birth. I don't have a birth certificate. Oh, yeah, you do. Born in New Paltz, New York. Wrote a letter to New Paltz, Vital Records, wherever it was at the time. And they came back and said, well, there's nobody named Helen Grace born on this date to people of this name here, but, and thankfully they said, but there is to these parents on this date born a girl by the name of Josephine. I asked my grandmother, Grandmother, who is Josephine? And she said, oh, it was probably my father's girlfriend at the time. He wanted to name me Josephine, I guess. And mother wouldn't go for it, so he went and filed the paperwork and made it Josephine. So that woman who birthed my grandmother, her name was Frances Matilda Manning, and she married a man by the name of Beely. Joseph Beely. So in looking at Social Security, I learned that there are two different applications for Social Security, one early on in the 1930s and one in 1950. 1951, 1949, 1950, something like that. And they have two different sets of parents. I have three different dates of marriage for Florence. One in a civil record, one in a church record, and one in her own handwriting, where in her own handwriting she says her middle name is Maria, not Matilda. And at the same